it kind of felt like a little sketchy and a little fringy. And but the more I looked into it on the business side, I was like, wow, you have 10% of American households renting a storage unit. And that's huge. And when you assess the competitive landscape, there's not really anything interesting. It's the same dowdy looking self-storage facilities. There's not great signage. There's very little tech. Customers are still complaining that they have to drop off a check at the facility. And then they have to sit in their office and like sit through the insurance pitch. And like it just, at the time it was 2020. In 2020, there's online payments, right? There's a lot of things that are happening. And I just felt like, wow, for all the gaps or the like not great things that I'm seeing in self-storage, I can fix it. I can make it a modern experience. And I like to say we aspire to be the Warby Parker of self-storage.
I want to start with your story in real estate. How did you get into real estate? And interestingly enough, you started in hospitality. So if there's something to talk about there, let's start there. But you did some cool stuff after. So we'll start wherever you want.
Yeah, I'll start in my teenage years. I actually was born and raised in Livingston, New Jersey. And then when I was 13, my family, we moved to Hong Kong. And then after a couple of years, we moved to Shanghai. And it was the kind of early 2000s. And it was at a time when China was just insane with development. Like you would see entire towers or buildings going up overnight. And I just thought like, oh, this is how real estate works. Like this is how it's done. And you have entire communities changing. Like you could see the retail, the streetscape, like just everything was changing so quickly. And I was like, I want to be part of that. That's really cool. And I thought the coolest part of it was just the hotels, right? Like they were all really unique and beautiful and well designed. And so I went to NYU. I studied hotel management, hotel development, and quickly learned it was not that. And I did some internships and I learned a lot, but it just, I was kind of like the revenue management intern and it was really boring. So I decided like I'm going to do more well-rounded real estate investment. And I got like my first institutional job or my first job out of college was at Prudential. And that was great. Like I actually learned a lot about different asset classes. I learned how to value buildings, how to buy them. And so it really culminated from just like my childhood, always thinking, looking, and kind of being around real estate. And I've been stuck ever since.
How did the hotel dream get broken for you?
I worked at a really, really, really fancy hotel in New York City, a boutique hotel. I won't call it out, but I was at the front desk and then I kind of interned and worked in all different departments. And I was like, this sucks. This really sucks. This is just, this is, I learned customer service. I learned how to talk to people and really how to manage expectations and deal with that kind of stuff. But I was like, I just want to do more. Like, I think I want to be a part of like bigger landscapes, communities. And so just working the front desk at this hotel didn't really do it for me. And maybe I was a little jaded by that.
Yeah, a lot of people don't realize that hotels are an operating business and they happen to typically own real estate as well. But all other real estate, someone else is operating whatever the business is inside of the real estate. And in hotels, you're doing both. So it gets to be really hard, especially when you have a lot of them, when you have to be on the operation side, which is where you were. What made you then want to go into something else?
Well, I just found during that internship, I wasn't so drawn to the operating system and the revenue management and the security. Like I was like, oh, look at this ceiling. And oh, it's interesting how they designed this space. And oh, I wonder, what taxes they pay. Just like those kinds of questions. And so I knew that my calling was more the real estate, the finance development side rather than the operations. And I guess it's not so surprising that I ended up in a real estate business with a pretty operationally light lift, which we can talk about later.
We're going to get there.
Yeah.
What happened after hotels, after Prudential?
Yeah, I just kept working my way closer and closer to the physical assets, to the end user. So I joined L&L Holding Company. It's a New York City developer, mostly of office. And then I spent some time at Equinox working on the expansion of luxury fitness clubs, and then joined Industrious, which is one of the largest co-working companies globally now, and is now owned by CBRE. And I was the first real estate hire there. And it was crazy because I did, I think, like 40 deals my first year. Then I built a team, then we launched new products, and it just was so foundational in terms of teaching me how to build a business. And really, in many ways, gave me a playbook to build my company stuff.
I know some real estate entrepreneurs that had some success and maybe they're kind of like off in a little cabin in the woods somewhere. And I think real estate is a lot about flow of deals, flow of ideas. Can you talk a little bit about your experience learning from all of these real estate companies, building some of these real estate companies, and being in New York City?
Yeah, I think I learned from really early on. It's not necessarily how good you are at modeling or underwriting or any of that. It's just who you know. That is so much more important. And I would just see all these successful people around me, and they're like, oh, I know this person, or I know this person. And like, I think being around that, and also being pretty outgoing and personal myself, I really took that to heart. And so I love making new friends. I'm pretty good at it, and I love learning about people, and what they do and what they care about and how they build their businesses. How's that different from me? And so I think naturally am just a connector of people. And oftentimes I approach networking, not like networking, but just like, how can I help you? Like I just want to be helpful. And I think, and oftentimes networking is viewed as like, oh, what can I get out of this person? It's not that. Like, I think it's very much a two-way street, and like, you're going to help people, and eh, maybe you'll never see that come back, or maybe you will in a different form. So that was the biggest lesson, being around successful, growth-oriented real estate companies. And like, obviously the numbers matter, and like how to read a deal, what a good deal looks like, what a bad deal looks like, how that might differ by like fund or hold period or whatever. I learned just a lot about the different stakeholders in real estate, right? Because you have everything from your institutional investment capital partner to your developer to your broker to all these different people who make real estate go and move. So those are really good lessons, firsthand experience that I got.
How would you advise younger folks in real estate to kind of climb the real estate ladder like you climbed it? Like, what were some of the key things that you were doing that maybe others weren't doing?
Yeah, to be honest with you, I don't even know how to give advice in the age of AI. Like, I don't know exactly how that has changed job prospects for young people, but I keep hearing over and over again, AI is going to really mess with your entry level employees. Like, they're not going to have as much opportunity because the jobs that they were doing, AI is now capable of. So I think that's just like a scary thing to think about. But then what marketable human skills and qualities can you bring to the table in addition to like the analytical side? And I think that's, going back to creating connections, meeting people, sharing information, like doing more work than your peers or that the AI is capable of. So I don't really know how to answer that question in the day and age of AI. I think it's just kind of a scary place right now.
How are you using AI in your business today?
I'm trying to use it everywhere. Like, if we have a problem, if we have a hole or gap to fill, I'm always defaulting to tech or AI. Like, how can we use that before we even think about hiring a person? And so, the most tactical ways, we have AI powered security cameras. We're able to track what's going on in the spaces, even though we're 100% remotely operated. And, if there were ever an incident, we could search like man in red shirt, and it'll pull all of the video clips of that man in a red shirt, and we don't need to sift through hours and hours and hours of footage. And you can even do things like draw a zone. And so for us in self storage, we can draw like the hallway. And if anybody leaves a box or garbage or something in the hallway, it would alert us, if it's been static there for 30 minutes. So those are like really good examples on the security side. We're using it to automate collections or late payments. We are launching an AI agent, and essentially it's going to pick up the phone and talk to you, text you, email you, chat with you, to not only make a sale, to answer any questions about access billing. Yeah, and like those are like the most meaty ways. We're certainly using it on the software development side. It's writing code for us. It's checking code. So in that way, we don't need as many engineers, right, as we might have in the past. And I'm just like I'm so obsessed with it, and I feel like I'm late to the game just in the tech world, but I feel like I'm early to the game in the real estate world.
You're early, for sure.
I'm early, yeah.
Real estate's very slow.
It's slow, but like we're trying to make it fast, and that's the really hard thing that we're dealing with right now.
At Equinox, their site selection is very particular. And I don't think that's something you could necessarily outsource to AI. I mean, I'm sure you can pull demographics and other sorts of data, but the touchy-feely side of real
Yeah,
estate that you probably saw at Equinox can't easily be replaced today. What were some of the insights that you were focused on at Equinox, identifying sites and locations, and how did that help you think about locations today in your current business?
for sure. Uh, Equinox is the best lesson in site selection and demographics and psychographics and how do you find your target audience and where do they exist in a dense enough place to kind of validate this business. And it was the first time I had actually seen that side of the real estate world. I just thought like, oh, tenants lease space and that's it. Like they just lease good space. No, like you need to find all of these dynamics. And I learned a lot from that team, and I think there's the art and the science to it, right? Like, because all the numbers can say like, oh, these people here shop at Nordstrom. They don't shop at Kohl's, right? Like they spend X amount on their credit cards versus like, hey, these people are on debit cards, and so just those are just like a couple small examples, but the art of it is then great. Now I have this data and now I have this like kind of pinpointed area and I'm looking for real estate. But I'll give you a really good example. Like, I remember there was a suburban location that Equinox had that just didn't do well. And like all the numbers made sense. All the demographics and psychographic data made sense. But what I heard was like it was just on the wrong side of the highway. It just like getting off on this exit and it made it so that it didn't recognize what were the like commuting patterns and what would make it easy for people to visit. And like just such a small decision like that is the art of it. And so now when I think about stuff, it's a really different exercise because we're looking at household patterns like renting versus owning. And what is the use case? Like, do they have extra stuff? Are they moving? Are they renovating? So, like, we're looking for different things, but it's still informing where we go. And the good news for us is that we self storage is in demand in more places than perhaps like a luxury fitness club, right? So I would say we have an easier time, but still apply a lot of the same learnings and frameworks.
So you've gone from Equinox to Industrious. Now you're doing self-storage. We're going to talk about Industrious, but it seems like the trend is the addressable market. The population size is getting bigger and bigger on each of those different real estate asset classes. So I'd love to know if you can kind of riff a little bit on niche real estate versus more expansive, kind of generic real estate, commodity stuff where more people can use it versus Equinox, which is a very, very limited footprint.
I had never thought about it like that, but you're right. The total addressable market is bigger in something like a self storage. I've always found like I was more drawn to the hey, Equinox is like really cool and shiny and sexy and edgy, and then Industrious was kind of that for office space to an extent, right? And then it was like, wow, nothing like that exists in self storage. Like nobody is trying to make the branding interesting, the customer experience unique, the spaces well designed. Like nobody's trying to do that, and so that was really more of the opportunity that I was drawn to. But to your point, when I learned that 10% of U.S. households rent a storage unit, I was like, holy shit, this is a lot of people, and at first I was like, oh, it must be easier to get customers. No, I was very humbled in learning about marketing and sales and being very targeted. And I think we're fortunate in that it's a very sticky product, which is great, but it certainly has its own unique characteristics about it.
So you're employee number 1 at Industrious. I said to you yesterday when we were kind of prepping for this, you said you're the first real estate employee, but isn't Industrious like a real estate company? So first real estate employee, you're probably like kind of there from ground
Kind
zero.
of
What was that
doing
like?
everything. Yeah. I am. So, but before I joined my old boss, Justin Sterry, he's president of Industrious, or at the time he was, and he was responsible for all the real estate. So he would go to like Columbus, Ohio, St. Louis, all by himself. And, at the time the team was much smaller. And when he reached out, to be honest with you, I had never heard of Industrious. I was actually obsessed with WeWork at the time. I really was. I was just like, this is so cool. There's slide in the office. Like if there's this, I want to be part of that. And I applied to so many jobs at WeWork on the real estate team. Nobody ever called me back. Like nobody ever gave me a chance. I never interviewed there. And I was just like, when Industrious reached out, I was like, I never heard of them, but like, I think it's similar. And I am so fortunate. And I honestly didn't do enough research, but I was like, I think it's like close enough. Like it's really, similar. And so I joined and I looking back, I'm like, oh, I was so lucky just to join a team that had such great leadership, so thoughtful about growing the business, making financial decisions for the business. And like, I didn't know that at the time. But that was by design. I didn't just like, not all co-working companies are created equal. And yeah, I did a ton of deals my first year. I was on a plane all the time and I loved it. Like I loved touching the real estate. Because when I first started in my career at Prudential, I was behind a computer looking at Argus models all day long.
Yep. Yep.
And so I think for me, it was like, this is real. And, 10 months later, a year later, I could see a co-working space be built and I could see jobs being created and people using the space. And I was like, going back to community, I was like, this is community. Then I like had a really big role in bringing this to life. And so I've loved that ever since. I've loved the being as close to the real estate side of the business, the user experience as much as possible. And yeah, Industrious is just such an incredible company. And I was so lucky to be there.
During your time at Industrious, what were they doing right and what were they doing wrong?
Yeah, they were doing a lot of things right, like really thinking about customer experience, scalable operational processes. But the thing that they weren't doing right, and I would say underinvested in, was technology. I felt like, and I saw oftentimes the answer to a problem was like, oh, let's hire someone, a junior person to kind of like do that job. And I think at the time it should have been, hey, what technology or what like more scalable ways can we fix this problem? With Industrious, yeah, it's just like I think about overhead and then I think about the other options or alternatives on the technology side and like it's just underinvested. Yeah.
Let's talk about what it was like on the Industrious side watching WeWork, which it seemed like a lot of the attention was on WeWork. You knew WeWork more than Industrious. So what was that like, kind of looking out across the aisle and seeing WeWork while you were building Industrious?
It didn't make sense because oftentimes we'd be competing on the same deals. And I would hear, oh, you lost this deal because WeWork agreed to this rent and TI and whatever. And I was just like, but how? I ran the numbers and it wouldn't make money at that level. And so that happened a lot and it just forced us to be more creative. And I felt like I was always punching above my weight. And that like underdog feeling of, how do I get scrappy and for us, that was just being better. Like if we can prove to landlords that we are a better operator, that we are more in demand from corporate tenants, then certainly they're going to want to work with us. And that was true. Like we just literally outperformed them. And that allowed us to then spearhead an asset light strategy. So we started introducing management agreements, revenue sharing leases at a time when landlords are like, I don't want to touch that. I just want my fixed rent lease. And if you're not going to give it to me, I'm going to go to WeWork. But we could literally say, we are better. for your building. We will help grow tenants into long-term space upstairs or downstairs. You can then use us as like kind of like an amenity for the rest of your tenants. And so really just outperform them. And that's a really hard thing to do because WeWork's over here being like, take millions of dollars, take this guarantee, take this security deposit. And we're like, hey, we're not going to give you any of those things. You're going to pay us a management fee. Like that's a very different ask when you're going to the landlord. And we were able to do that because I think one, we were better, but two, because we came from the real estate side, we understood the numbers, we understood how buildings traded, how we could create value. Like we could speak in a sophisticated way about how our tenancy was going to be better for the building overall. And I think I've heard through the grapevine, like the real estate people that have been through the revolving doors at WeWork, like they were kind of like, I guess, more brokers, and so didn't necessarily get the valuation side of the business. And so I think that was really an advantage that we had and really looked for when we were hiring.
In these co-working spaces, what's the highest, because you've seen all of them, so what's the highest ROI good idea that needs to be in a co-working space today?
The first thing that came to mind was a free breakfast.
No,
But
that's a real thing.
yeah, I think it's kind of how you feel in the space. Of course, you need like an office that suits your needs. You need very much conference rooms, phone rooms. You need enough phone rooms too. Oftentimes, that's the thing that's lacking, and people don't realize that until they're actually using the space. But I think how people feel in the space, how invested they are. Like, do you know the staff's names? Do you attend the parties? Do you enjoy the free breakfast? Do you like the sparkling water? And so you need reasons to want to come into the office and spend 30 minutes, an hour commuting into the office when otherwise you could just work from home. So you need to like feel something other than the four walls of an office. And it's really hard to describe what that is, but like I feel like Industrious has bottled that up in a really magical way. And it's very unique to every single location. And people just like want to stay with Industrious and grow with Industrious because they love the product, they love the people and the experience.
Is it more profitable for these companies to focus on solopreneurs or freelancers versus a company maybe that is gonna have 10 people there or 5 people there? Or is it important to have a mix?
Yeah, this might be a lazy answer, but I do think it's like diversification of risk and you have different growth potential depending on whether you're, a freelancer, small startup, versus if you're a corporate tenant. And so, as an example, when I started Stuff, I initially was remote, and then my team was like, you know what? We love being with each other. Like we love seeing you or seeing each other and fixing problems or building things faster. And so we very quickly went from remote to 2-person office to 8-person office. We're now like looking for more space. And so if you only focused on the corporate tenants, right, like the Salesforces of the world or KPMG or whatever, uh, they make real estate decisions. Like for sure, they buy in bulk, right? But it's a lot more. It's hard to read and it's hard to predict, right? Just because like you don't. They're just making decisions based on how the economy is performing, how the business is doing. Whereas it's a lot more predictable to think that hey, a startup or a freelancer could then double in size to a 2-person office and then double in size to a 4-person versus, hey, is KPMG headcount like 100 or 1,000? And like, how do we grow around that? So I think you need a mix of both.
When I started my business, I started out in a co-working space. It was one down here in South Florida. And one of the things I struggled with kind of early on was maybe it was like the curation of the tenants. Maybe it was just me feeling like I wanted to act like a big shot and didn't want to feel like a little entrepreneur because we were working on some larger real estate projects. But like I always found it weird if, you know, I was talking about a deal and then like some like wedding photographer is trying to sell like a $1,500 wedding, or like, you bring people into the office and some people there are dressed like slobs because maybe they don't care. And like some people are, dressed like this. And how, like, is that something that you guys thought about? Because that is something that, and maybe it's a Miami thing, maybe each market is a little bit different, but I definitely feel like the curation of who's there, where there's like maybe like-minded businesses or kind of like-minded people, is somewhat important. And I don't know if I'm articulating that the right way, but did you run into that? Because it's definitely something I think about.
Yeah, we ran into that. And I remember actually in our office, there was a Smile Direct Club. So you would have people coming in and
Right.
getting like braces. But
Like,
then
that's
over
weird. Now you
here,
have,
they're
like, a random
doing,
braces person coming in, and you're trying to, like, launch a self-storage company.
yeah. And so I think it was challenging and I think could be off-putting depending on what type of business you're running. I think in many ways, Industrious over time it dominates the premium sector, like the premium segment of co-working. And so I think inherently due to the price, the amenities, the offerings that Industrious now provides, it probably prices out the, wedding photographer or
Yep.
somebody like that. So I think that's one way to do it. I It's hard because when you're running a co-working space, it's like, wait, but the wedding photographer's money is just as good as the real estate investor's money. Like,
100%.
and so I think that's a really hard thing to thread.
But
But I
they
do
might be
know that
thinking about the same thing as me. They're like, all these, like,
yeah,
finance dudes and gals, like,
it's
all
so
those
boring.
memes with, like, the people wearing the vest and stuff, like, maybe
Yeah,
that's
yeah,
and they're like,
yeah.
"I don't wanna be with these losers, like, we wanna be with creative people."
Yeah. I will tell you, all of the thematic co-working spaces that I've encountered, or like, hey, it's more women, or it's all startups, or whatever, they have all failed. They have
Mm,
not done well. So from a business perspective, it hasn't really worked out. And I think it makes sense because you're kind of closing your target audience or you're narrowing it to a much smaller group.
yep. So we've raised money, like, in Dallas, and in Dallas, there's a lot of family offices. There's all this oil money, and once someone strikes it rich with oil, they start a family office. And one of the office trends that we've been seeing there is maybe 1, 2, or 3 families will get together and, like, split an office floor. And you don't really know, like, you could think it's all the same company. It could be 3 companies, it could be 4 companies. You don't really know because it kind of all blends in. But that to me sounds like a really cool model. And they, like, share a kitchen, they share an amazing boardroom. But I definitely think there's this trend that I'm seeing of, like, these, it's elevated co-working spaces, but you can't really tell. It's like, I guess, boutique office. Like, there's one in Miami Beach that Barry Sternlicht developed that has a similar vibe. And I think that could be part of the trend. But, like, how important was design at Industrious? Because
So
that's
important. The CEO signed off on every FF&E package, every interior design package, and they all looked great. The spaces looked great, and most of them aged pretty well. Like some of the earlier ones, when you're experimenting, those didn't transcend like, trends and whatever. But yeah, that was very important. And it was incredibly important at Equinox, right? It was everything. It was kind of like the experience overall. That is important to me at stuff, but I balance that with, hey, it's self storage. It's not visited quite the same way as gyms or quite the same way as co working. So we make it inviting and we invest up to a point where we think we're going to see an ROI. And beyond that, you're really like, do you need plush felt walls in your self-storage facility?
no.
Probably not. You're not going to pay an extra $10, $15. And so I think there's a breaking point depending on the type of business where you could overinvest and really not see a return.
How do you think about remote work and working from home in your current business?
Ooh, I think there's a combination, and I think like companies need to be flexible given their employee situations. So we're in the office 2 to 3 times a week, and then certain teams are remote. So our engineering team, they're remote. Like I get it. They need to be heads down coding. They can't be in a loud office where people are exchanging ideas or, having a bunch of meetings. And so I think it depends and you have to be flexible given the situation. And because my daughter just walked in, I'm kind of like, I love going to the office. It is so it lets me focus. And yesterday when my team was in the office, like you just catch conversations and you're like, oh wait, you're doing that? Or like, oh, hold up. Like I'm also working on something similar. You can use it. Right. Like you hear these conversations over and over. And I think it's really sad that a lot of young people won't get that experience, like won't be in the office, won't be mentored by more senior leadership. And so I think there's like a fine balance though. And certainly now as a mom of two kids, I really appreciate that flexibility.
You appreciate it both. Well, I mean, you own the company, you run the company, so you appreciate it both ways, but you wanna be in like, I can work from home all day long, but I don't really wanna work from home because it's boring, and all my colleagues and friends are in the office, and that's where it's fun, and we charge each other up. But I guess what you're saying is you also want the flexibility that if something's happening at home, maybe with one of your kids, you wanna go home. So, like, I've struggled with that because we have a very operational business where, like, everyone in a hotel pretty much has to work in a hotel. It's like a factory, okay? Like,
Right.
you can't have all the factory workers building the cars and then the executives are working from home. That
Right.
doesn't seem fair. But we've had, like, salespeople that say, "Oh, could I work from home, 2 days a week?" And I always tell my president, I'm like, "Well, why do they need to work from home? Like, what's the reason to work from home?" And you never get, like, a good answer. I think if I got an answer like, my daughter takes piano lessons from 2 to 4, and I wanna be there on Thursdays when she takes the piano lesson, well, that's like, "Oh, well, why don't we just solve for that problem? Just let us know when you have the piano lesson, go home and do that, and you'll do your rest of the work whenever you can." But maybe I'm just pessimistic and it's still like some COVID burn off stuff. But I always think that people just want to be home because they don't want to work and they want to like do
I
whatever
think
they want
that's
to
part
do.
of it. I also know that in our rowdy office, it can be hard to do heads down work. Like maybe you have to work on a strategy document
Yep.
and you don't need Kat talking to whoever over there. You don't have to like listen to that. I mean, we have the wrong setup, right? But yeah, I think it just depends on the culture of the business. Like for us, especially in startups, we know that work doesn't end 9 to 5. Like, sure, you might
Changes.
need some flexibility in that period of time, but like oftentimes we pick right back up. Like my construction person was like, "Yeah, we had an issue, and I was looking at the cameras and doing this thing at 9:30 just because that needed to happen." And so when I think about flexibility, I think about it in like a lot of different ways. Not only where you work, when you work, and just I think when I'm really like flexible and reasonable and like care about someone beyond their work, but like their personal lives, like I see that back in dividends. Yeah.
Let's talk about stuff. How did you start it? How did you have the idea? What happened? I mean, Industrious, like things were going well, right? Why did you
Things are going
change?
well. I was still working at Industrious, but during the pandemic, I was like baking sourdough bread very terribly. It was so bad. It was so hard. It's so yucky and
Do you have an
didn't.
Instagram channel?
I do NYC Fatty Cat.
Okay.
So it tells you, obviously I like to eat. Yeah, I it did the baking of the sourdough bread didn't really work out for me, and so I started keeping a journal instead of business ideas. And every business idea I wrote in this journal was how do we monetize underutilized real estate? Just because I've been through so many buildings, from leasing at Industrious to asset management tours at Prudential, and like it was peculiar to me that I would walk by a basement or a mechanical floor or like some funky space on my way to something else. And yet so much of that kind of space was sitting empty, right? Like, why would you build it just to let it sit there and do nothing with it? And so I thought about doggy daycare. Is that space a ghost kitchen? Is it a data center? Like, what can we do here? And I was so obsessed with ghost kitchens at the time because
Yep.
it was a passion project. At the time in 2020, restaurants were really struggling, right? It was a pandemic. They didn't have any business. And I was like, I want to save restaurants. And I'm going to do this by opening ghost kitchens in these weird, funky spaces. And landlords will make money and then they'll, have cheaper rent and all that sort of stuff. And I went to one of my now investors who left where he was and started his own firm. But he saw my work at Industrious firsthand. And he was like, Kat, I will literally invest in anything you work on but ghost kitchens. Like, think of anything else, anything but ghost kitchens. I was like, okay, but that's my only idea right now. And so he told me to start looking at self storage. And at the time, it was not even on my radar. I just thought like self-storage was kind of what you would find in that Breaking Bad episode, right? Like it didn't feel that it kind of felt like a little sketchy and a little fringy and but the more I looked into it on the business side, I was like, wow, you have 10% of American households renting a storage unit. And that's huge. And when you assess the competitive landscape, there's not really anything interesting, right? It's the same dowdy looking self storage facilities. There's not great signage. There's very little tech. Customers are still complaining that they have to drop off a check at the facility and then they have to sit in their office and like sit through the insurance pitch. And like it just, at the time it was 2020. In 2020, there's online payments already, right? There's a lot of things that are happening. And I just felt like, wow, for all the gaps or the like not great things that I'm seeing in self-storage, I can fix it. I can make it a modern experience. And I like to say we aspire to be the Warby Parker of self-storage, right? Because when I was growing up, glasses were not cool. Now glasses are all the rage and you have different types of lenses and it's appealing and kind of, fashionable. So anyways, we started stuff and the investor who was like, no, ghost kitchens, seeded and incubated the company and helped get the first facility, which is only 25 units. It was just like a tiny little basement in San Francisco. And we sold out in 3 months and we're like, wait, it worked. It actually worked. And so let's raise more money. Let's actually make this a business. And so raised a seed round, launched, I want to say like 15 locations over the next 2 years. And now we're at upwards of 30 locations in 7 cities. And the idea is monetizing underutilized real estate as tech-enabled self-storage. Everything is remotely operated. We're in urban, dense urban neighborhoods. We're really close to where you live or where you work. And then on the customer side, it's great because it's like, I can just go across the street or around the corner. I don't have to drive 30 minutes away and spend almost like a half day dealing with my storage. And I think what's interesting is that the use cases are different for us than they might be for a public storage or extra space. So for us, we become an extension of people's homes. So it's like that extra closet that you've always wanted, or it's a place that you might visit a little bit more often than a public storage where maybe you put your inherited heirlooms, family heirlooms. And like
Why?
you're not going to visit that because we're so close, you want to use your storage more and more. It becomes part of your daily life. Like, oh, I don't want to keep my golf clubs in my apartment, right? Or my skis. I'll just go around the corner and pick them up and go on my weekend trip. Whereas if you're renting from one of the larger REITs, and certainly in the suburban areas, like they tend to be more out of the way on the kind of edges of neighborhoods. And so you're just not going to stop by quite as often.
Yeah, it's a really good point because all those places are typically so big. Your places tend to be a little bit smaller because you're utilizing an underutilized space that's probably on the way to someone's work or on the way to dropping a kid off at school. That's
Yeah,
fascinating.
even better if we have a location here in Brooklyn in Prospect Heights. I go to Prospect Heights all the time for dinner, drop off my kids to like a swim lesson, and I could just like hop in and get whatever I need. Oh, hey, I need my Easter decorations. God knows I don't have Easter decorations, but you know what I'm saying.
I get it. Let's go back to your first investor. Okay. A lot of people's fear in starting a company or doing their first real estate deal is where am I going to get the capital? Like, I don't have enough capital to do it myself. Where am I going to get the capital? How did you kind of position yourself in the right way so this person wanted to invest with you? And how did you know they wanted to invest with you?
Oh, I fell into it. I got really lucky. So Adam, he started Wilshire Lane Capital. He was at Fifth Wall before, and Fifth Wall had invested in Industrious. And I was the kind of like the relationship manager at Industrious. And so we worked with Fifth Wall closely to get introduced to their LPs and really try to
Yep.
like, make some real estate deals work. Anyways, he was like, Kat, I've seen your work firsthand. And so when I reached out, I wasn't ready to pitch. I didn't have a pitch deck. I didn't know how much money I needed. I didn't even have an idea, right? Because apparently the ghost kitchens didn't work. So he basically was like, I've seen your work and I want to invest in you as a person. And that might be self-storage, right? Or it might be something else. And so he actually followed up with me like every 2 to 3 weeks, like, oh, did you work on your idea? Like, do you have a new idea? And so in many ways, he kind of like pushed me into the entrepreneurial world because I was already tinkering there, but I didn't even know how to raise money or like where would I even start. But I was fortunate enough to have that connection. And again, going back to connections, like you never know when those will be valuable or will do something for you in the future. And so I learned a lot from Adam, and he's still on the board, and we talk a lot. But he helped bring in our co-lead on the seed round, Harlem Capital. And I think now looking back, uh, I just don't even know if I could have. I'm sure I could have figured it out, but it was so much easier having that one connection lead to all these other intros and capital sources. So I now, when I meet founders, especially in the early stages, I'm like, how can I help you? What interest do you need? And oftentimes, like when you're early and you don't want to ask for help, or it depend, some people just don't ask for help. And I kind of like am in your face about it. Like, hey, how can I help you? What do you need? Just because I know how difficult it is to navigate without a map or a compass. So yeah, I got lucky. And I think business oftentimes is luck plus hard work. And those things come together and equal success.
I always think of WeWork like a real estate company that was pretending to be like a tech company. You kind of describe yourself as a startup. How do you walk that thin line between approaching your business like a startup, which I kind of tend to think of very technology oriented, versus a real estate company? Like a lot of your competitors would consider themselves real estate companies.
So when I first started, I knew that from observing Industrious and implementing technology, I would say a little too late in their journey. I was like, this is where I'm going to start. So before I hire anybody else, let me just figure out what I want to do on the tech roadmap, or like what do I want to build or what do I want to buy to really power the business. And we decided, you know what? Like we're going to have a digital key, right? We're not going to have on-site staff. So how are people going to get in? And then we realized, wow, there's literally unlimited number of access control systems.
Yep.
Great. Some of them are legacies. Some of them have digital or have APIs so that we can have like an app or mobile digital key or something like that. And then everything started with the digital key. Like you literally just need to get into the space, into your unit. And then from there, we built out a proprietary management software over the last 4 years that handles not only access control, security, billing, website content and updates, inventory. And so it just happened naturally. And what you see now is that we have 3 full-time ops people for over 30 locations. I like to brag about that all day long because it really tells you, hey, the tech is carrying the weight here. The tech is powering the business. And I think that's really powerful because when you look at your traditional self-storage company, those are big companies with call centers and on-site staff and engineers and this and that and the other thing. So we figured out how to do it with 3 full-time employees as well as floating field technicians that are part-time. And I just think, wow, like we look so different and we operate so differently than your typical self-storage company. And I think as a customer, you might not realize that because you don't know who's cleaning the space. You don't know kind of the back end, but certainly when you look at it from an investor lens or from a like a real estate lens, you're like, wow, this is run really differently, and it's all due to technology.
I remember someone breaking down a self-storage business, more of a traditional business. Like there was like minor tech enabled, but it was still like basic. And they were telling me about like the locks. Like all the units have a lock, and when someone doesn't pay, you like cut the lock off or you put another lock on. So then they know. I'm like, this is like too confusing. Like, do you have those locks or do you use like electronic locks? And what happens when people don't pay? How do you, I don't know, sell their stuff, or how do you deal with all that?
Oh, so i- it's like not a beautiful part of the business, but it's a beautiful part of the business because self storage is so sticky. And if they're behind on payment, typically we'll send notices. And if it reaches a certain threshold or number of days, then we will overlock, like you were
That's what it's called,
describing.
overlock. Okay. So
Yeah,
you
yeah,
do
yeah.
that too.
Overlock. Yeah, and then we'll turn off the digital access into the facility. And guess what? Like the next time they come and the digital key doesn't work, guess what
They're calling
happens?
you.
They usually they get, on time with their payments. And yeah, well, I think we're really reasonable. Like we always try to reach out. We always give people chances to like true up. But if they can't quite get there, or if they're being bad actors or whatnot, there is a lot more, I would say, generous or landlord favorable kind of legal processes in how you deal with evictions, auctions, that sort of thing. And I say it's more landlord favorable because I compare it to, like a multifamily landlord.
Yeah.
You might not be able to evict for like a whole year, depending on, the municipality that you're talking about. And then you're not able to then resell that apartment for a long time. But with us, it generally is like a 2 to 3 month process if really a customer is not
And why
working
don't
with
you have
us.
electronic locks on the actual units?
Yeah, we explored it. The electronic locks are quite expensive, almost as expensive as building the storage unit. But that's not why we're not necessarily doing it. Sometimes it's technology kind of backfires and it's like the
Yeah.
Wi-Fi goes out and so all the locks don't work, and like what's your backup plan when you're a remotely operated business? And so we still want to explore it. Like I'm really curious about it, and I'm almost one day like, oh, maybe we should develop our own lock because we know what's good and bad about the locks out there. But this is where we're just like simplicity. Maybe like the old school way is like fine for us right now.
Do people care about having a Warby Parker self-storage vibe?
Yes and no. I think it depends on who you're talking about. I think when you're talking about women who are storing their belongings, they don't the vibe matters, right? Like you don't want to walk into like a sterile, quiet place where there's like you're not sure where you're going. It's kind of dark. Maybe there's it just doesn't feel right, certainly from a security perspective. And so if you walk into a space that has really good lighting and it has beautiful signage and it has like we have murals that are kind of cute, like, hey, fun facts about storage. And if Justin Bieber is playing on the speakers, like you're just like, oh, this feels different, right? Because it feels different to walk into a one hotel than it
Yep.
does a Fairfield Inn. It just is
Yep.
different. And
So
there's a
you
customer for
actually do
every.
kind of like design the inside of the spaces. It's not just having a better website and a better payment system and having that all look pretty and work with Apple Pay. Like the inside looks different too.
Yeah, I would say the storage units themselves don't look different.
Right.
Because it's still the four walls, it's four metal walls and a door and a lock. But certainly like the common areas, the facility map. I had this obsession with, hey, when you look down a hallway, it can't just be a bunch of storage units. Like it just like it's like endless. And you're like, where do I go? What's at the end of this hallway? And so we try as much as possible to really have some sort of design element break up that monotony. Right? Like maybe it's something at the end of the hallway that catches your eye, that makes it feel more welcoming to walk down that hallway. Or maybe we have like bigger walls where we can do something kind of cute and fun. And we're actually playing around with having these like decals with measurements because people oftentimes are like, well, what fits in a 5x5 versus a 5x10? And most storage facilities will like put a sofa in the storage unit and like put some ugly furniture. And that's how they show you what fits. And
Yeah.
I'm like, oh, I don't want to see that ugly ass sofa. I don't want to see, it's just, anyways, we have these decals that show you 1 foot, 2 foot, 3, 5, the measurements. And so you can still visually see what can fit. And we have like really cool graphics, but you're not like put off by the sofa that's maybe not your style. So we can, I think, solve similar problems or solve problems in a very different way, but still answer similar questions for customers.
I'm one of those people that kind of does a lot of research on my own, but then when I want to buy something, I like want to buy it very quickly and I don't want to talk to people. I don't want to be upsold. And to me, like I feel like I tried to do a self-storage unit one time, and maybe this is like 5 or 6 years ago. and, like, you couldn't totally do it online. You had to, like, call someone. This was like a big public storage. It felt like a whole sales game, and I don't wanna talk to, like, a 12-year-old to sell me a 5 by 8 storage unit. Like, I just wanna click the thing and have it go to Apple Pay, and then, I just get the email where it is. I'm done with it. How important was the whole, like, transaction process, and how much time did you spend thinking about making that pretty and simple and
Yeah.
user-friendly?
So there's really two types of customers. You're one of the customers. Like, don't talk to me. I just want to move in.
Yeah, that's me.
And then you have this other customer who wants to talk to someone over the phone, has needs like a little bit more of like a hand holding consultative
Yep,
sale, like what fits in this unit, how do I get in? They need that. And so we have really had to think about how do we design the website, design the experience to encourage both and cultivate both types of sales. And so we when we think about everything from the experience of like, let's say clicking a Google ad or seeing one of our out of home ads, on the sidewalk, or from that all the way through to booking, we question every part of it. Like, is this button in the right place? Is this saying the right thing? Is the discount verbiage like appealing and concise? And we question it over and over again. It doesn't really stop. And we thought a lot about it. And we've had like maybe 2 or 3 website overhauls purely focused on booking flow, which is exactly what you're talking about. Because it's like, hey, Jake doesn't want to go through 10 different screens. He probably is like just okay putting his name, his address, and a credit card. Like he doesn't want to do anything else.
exactly.
But how do you get Jake to sign a rental agreement, acknowledge the rules, the policies, and like legally like still make a sale? And so you can obviously check it out, on your own or on our website, but we have to balance that with also the customer who very much wants to see a prominent phone number on the website and then to speak to a customer service agent like immediately and who, obviously they don't want to wait. And how do you do both? And so like if someone calls us, we handle the call, we answer the questions. And to get them closer to the booking process, we text them a unique booking link with the unit already selected, with their name filled out, with whatever information that we have,
Yep,
with the promo code applied, like getting them as close to the
right.
checkout process. And that was kind of like a more recent development. Early on, we'd be like, oh, great, like you just book on our website and then they disappear, right? Because you just get distracted. And so we think about these things all the time and what are new features or new ways to get people closer and make more sales and have a higher conversion rate. So we're just obsessed and it's not going to end. Yeah.
How does the economics work for you?
Yeah.
Because 'Cause you're real estate light, so you don't own any of the real estate.
We don't. So on a high level, our business model is B2B to C. So the B2B side is us partnering with landlords and we do that through a revenue sharing agreement. And what's common in real estate is a TI allowance for tenants. And so our TI allowance is a fraction of what a landlord might, provide to an office tenant or retail tenant. And so it becomes really appealing. And so for most landlords and most deals that we pursue, we're looking to pay back the landlord's TI allowance in about 12 months, plus or minus for bigger and smaller deals. And then on the B2C side, we have month-to-month agreements with our storage renters. And I think sometimes when landlords hear, oh, month to month, like there's no commitment, that's risky. But when you think about the inherent nature of
Yeah,
storage, it's like so sticky. Your stuff is there.
100
And
it's
you're
a
like,
gimmick. No one's moving their crap out.
yeah, it's
100%
like,
they're
I'll
keeping
deal
it
with it
there.
next month. I'll deal with it
Yeah,
next month. I'll deal with it next month. And the dirty, like not so secret is that price increases are a big thing in self-storage, right? Like your storage companies will typically increase prices on you like whenever they feel like, basically. We don't love that from a customer service perspective, right? Like that's not a good feeling to feel like, oh, I'm being taken advantage of. And so one thing that we pioneered is a price lock membership. Hey, for $10 a month or slightly more, you can lock in your price for 12 months.
smart.
So if you opt out, you're kind of saying like, okay, I understand I'm taking a risk and like I'm okay with that. But if you opt in, you now lock in your price and you're kind of telling us you're a stickier customer because you intend to stay for 12 months or longer. And by the way, we're collecting that $10 earlier rather than 6, 12 months later when a traditional operator might. So we love that. It's interesting who opts in and who opts out. Typically, the people who opt out are like, oh, I'll be there 3 to 6 months. No, they're not. They're going to be there 6, 12, even longer, right? And so they know, though, at least like their expectations have been managed appropriately. And so we think about that price off membership both from a customer expectation setting standpoint as well as a revenue generation standpoint because we're making more money.
So for new renters, I assume maybe you're changing pricing pretty frequently, but if you're an existing renter, how often would you typically be changing their pricing?
Yeah, we no sooner or no earlier than 6 months into their
Okay.
rental period. Uh,
Right. So it's not an every
and
month thing that you guys are messing around with the pricing. It's
no,
pretty
no, no, no.
slow for the existing renters.
Yeah, and we won't even go crazy even at that 6 month point. And sometimes, depending on how the market is performing, we might say, you know what, like we shouldn't do price increases right now. It's a soft market or pricing's down, and the competitors are doing a ton of promotions. Like we should hold off until the summer or something like that. So we wouldn't do it earlier than 6 months. And I think we tend to be quite fair and communicative when we do pricing increases. Certainly more so than the large competition. I've often heard of, you know, at month 4, it's now doubled. And that's like, that's not right. So
So
just not right. We're not going to do it.
as a landlord, if I was evaluating you or like signing a triple net deal with some office tenant, how much more money am I going to be making when compared to a triple net square foot office deal in the revenue share model? Am I like doing this because it's like free money? I was never going to rent this space anyways, or does it turn out to be a lot more profitable than a typical triple net deal?
I obviously have to say it depends.
Yeah, of course.
I think it depends on a lot of things. So if you have this vacant space, how long has it sat vacant? Do you think there's a way to actually lease it in the future? If not, then I call that static vacancy and I kind of write it off. And so oftentimes landlords will come to us being like, "Oh, I don't think I'm going to rent this space for like 2 years." And I'm like, "You know what? You should just wait it out because that's better for you because you think you're going to lease it. It's also better for us because we want stability and consistency. And if our average customer stays almost up to 2 years, we can't move out. We can't close up shop after that. So we're really open and honest about the situation. I like to focus on just the dead space, like truly, like it's never going to be rented. And in that type of space, I think it's really easy to say to a landlord, hey, you will never rent this, but I can get you in New York City or LA like 25, 30, $40 per square foot in rent on space that historically has been zero, right? And so that's a really, really compelling pitch versus, hey, we're talking about office space. Hey, we're talking about retail space that might have a better use long term. And I get that from because I have that landlord experience. Like I understand that. And so oftentimes we won't waste too much time focused on the office or retail space because we're just like it's less likely to transact.
What's the most challenging part of the business right now?
Mm, I hesitate because I'm just like everything is hard at the same time. Like it's just building a business is hard. I would say right now, there's softness in the self storage market. And so when we think about like our historical underwriting, when we expected rents to grow at, 5%, they're growing at 3%. It's like, how do we rejigger all of our expectation, our financial projections and think about cash planning and how do we then change up our marketing spend to increase rentals? Like, because everything is related, right? And so I think that is more difficult for us. And one of the things I wish I paid more attention to was literally the self storage industry. None of us have self storage experience. Actually, I have one team member that does. And I think the detriment of that is that we probably look to market studies or we probably don't spend enough time reading about the self
Yep.
storage industry and learning. And I'm really trying to figure out how do I make everyone not only think about the tech and the innovation, but like what's going on in the rest of the industry. And so I can think about a period of time, perhaps like a year and a half ago, where if I was just on top of the industry performance a little bit more, we probably would have had more accurate pricing and therefore higher sales conversion in a softer period. And so I think it's just like this learning mindset, this, hey, we're still in the self storage industry. We need to pay attention to this industry rather than just thinking we're at the front of it all the time. Yeah, so that's been a little bit more challenging, but everything feels hard all the time, but like still easier than taking care of my kids, to be honest with you. So I'm happy to do it.
Yeah, I mean, even in hotels, if you have the greatest boutique hotel and you think you're very different from everyone else, there's still macro things that impact the hospitality industry that are going to come in and affect your business. So, what are those kind of like monthly KPIs that you look at with your team to know if you're doing a good job and if you're successful right now?
Yeah. Number one for us is annual recurring revenue ARR. And that is pretty common in like the startup space that is
Yeah.
so used to subscription models and SaaS. So we certainly look at that. We look at churn or retention. They're kind of the same thing. At the end of the day, we look at NPS score. Are customers happy? Where can we do better? Those are the main things I like on an hourly basis, refresh and refresh. What's going on? How many sales? Yeah, but beyond that, like you can cut data in so many different ways, right? Like, great, how many sales? What percentage of those sales were large units versus small units? What percentage of sales happened on Wednesday versus Friday? How does that impact staffing? When are promotion or like when are sales slowest? When should we be running promotions to kind of like lift up and create some velocity? So like the KPIs all lead to business decisions. And they looking at the data really helps us narrow in on, hey, we need to focus on the top of the marketing funnel rather than the bottom this month or whatever it is. And I would say I'm more of an intuitive business person. Like I just know in my belly what kind of like what direction or where I need to focus. And so focusing on the data has certainly been more of like a learned expertise over the last couple years. And now I'm obsessed because I'm like, I feel it in my belly and I love the joy of then finding it in the data like, oh, yeah, I was right. Like that my read was right. Or, oh, wow, I was so off. Like, let me calibrate my intuition. And you hear that a lot from business leaders about intuition. Sometimes they just know.
Yeah, those are very like tech based KPIs, but even the storage people that I've talked about, they essentially are saying the same thing. They're just saying them in storage language. They're like, how many new customers did I sign up this week? Well, that's kind of the same thing as ARR. How many people left? Well, that's kind of the same thing as churn. Do you have any hard assets or hard investment? Or are you pretty much getting the landlord to cover your entire build out with the TI allowance?
Beyond that, it, it's security cameras and access control systems.
It's a
And
great
no,
business
I think
model.
the answer is no.
Yeah, it's a really good business model because, like, the assets on the real estate side obviously are one of the things that drag down the cost depending on where you are in a cycle. And some of our investors, say, and they said recently, what's going on with our hotels because Marriott and Hilton, their stock is through the roof right now. And I said, Marriott and Hilton are in a very different business from our business. They don't own anything anymore. They're in a revenue model, they're in a fee model, they're in a service business and a franchise business. And it's different from what we're doing, which is kind of like you because you're a little bit out of the real estate, but in the good part of the real estate.
Yeah. I mean, I'm so biased and I love it. And I such high conviction about the growth and where we're going. But it is really interesting because we need to still understand and I don't know if have empathy, but like we really need to be able to work with our real estate partners who are dealing with what you're talking about, right? Like high interest rates, refinancing, foreclosures, like just we need to be able to adjust our value prop or our pitch to speak to someone who maybe is just trying to cover debt service versus someone who is trying to provide a tenant amenity and attract new leasing. Those are you could apply stuff to both of those examples, but we're only able to do that if we truly understand what's going on the real estate side.
I was telling you yesterday, we have a hotel where I think this would be perfect for. It's literally space that either we're not smart enough or too lazy to potentially lease out to an office tenant, or I think from a capital standpoint, it would be pretty capital intensive potentially to do it, but it could work for your concept. And a lot of people have these underutilized spaces throughout their buildings that it's just like free cream on top in order to create value there.
Yeah, for sure. And we hear a lot from especially office owners who say it doesn't even make sense to sign an office lease because the TI allowance is $150.
Right.
And if I can work with you and the TI allowance is $20 and I pay that back in 1 year, that's so much better than the office lease with the big TI allowance and a 4-year payback period.
Yep.
So maybe the per square foot rent isn't the same number, obviously, but on a MPV basis, it makes more sense.
What's an impediment for growth to you right now?
Impediment for growth. Mostly I point to the supply side when I think about that. It's, hey, can we source enough deals? And how are we sourcing those deals? Are those, a good chunk of them inbound? Or is it going to require more outbound and more effort from our side? And I think we've been fortunate because it seems like the commercial real estate markets have stabilized. Whereas last year and perhaps a year before that, it was much more, hey, I love the idea about stuff. I want to make money in my building, but I'm just so focused on saving the building and working with my lender. And it just
Yep.
seems like in 2025, that's stabilized. Like most people have kicked the can down the road enough where like now they need to make money, right? Now it's about cash flow and we're such a good partner to do that with them. And so definitely seen the commercial real estate landscape change. And it took me a while to figure it out because at first I was like, oh, real estate's struggling. We're perfect. But real estate's struggling, like they don't have time to talk to us just yet. So now that there's a huge opening and it's really fun.
What does a perfect stuff location look like to you? So, for all the real estate owners listening to this,
Yeah.
describe ideally what you're looking for in a location.
It access is one of the top things that we think about. And fortunately, we can be really creative and work with like loading docks, garage entrances, service entrances, side doors, whatever. But my ideal would be we have a service entrance, like a side entrance that leads directly into our space. Ideal. And then that space is 5 to 20,000 square feet. We can still be really flexible there. It has 9-foot ceilings. It has sprinklers. It has some basic, nice LED lighting. It doesn't necessarily even need to be climate controlled, but I think any sort of air ventilation works. It needs 2 quad outlets,
That's it?
and that's it. Yeah,
Wow. And how big?
yeah, 5 to 20,000 square feet.
5 to 20.
Yeah, we would entertain bigger in certain markets for sure, but I call out access first because most of the time we don't get that side door into the space. It's like a side door down a hallway, then into the space, or like
Yep.
side door to a freight elevator into the space. So we can get really creative, but just how do you shorten the amount of friction for a customer from the street into the space? And at the same time, reduce any sort of friction for building tenants or the property manager so that we're really not in the way and you can secure the path into the space.
And what does the build out look like?
I can show you. I don't
Like,
know if
do
that
we
will.
just kind
Yeah.
of pack these things up? Like, are they foldable? Do you guys build them? Do you send them? Who builds them? Like, what's that process
Yeah,
look like?
we have a couple steel manufacturing partners, and what it really looks like is like you lay down a track and then you have corrugated steel panels
Okay.
and you set it up in such a way depending on your ideal unit mix. Hey, I want 5x5s. I want 5x10s. I want 10x10s. And because we have these common increments, if you lay down the track appropriately, like you can kind of adjust the sizes any which way. And then there's the nuances of, do you want a swing door or do you want a roll up door? Swing doors are easier to maintain. Roll up doors are more space efficient. So you have to make some of those calls. And it's anything from 6 feet to 8 feet in terms of unit height. And so we've been able to work in a lot of different spaces, different ceiling heights, different quirks, just because it's not modular, but it's so configurable of a system.
What would you like to be doing more of in the next 3 years, and what would you like to be doing less of in the next 3 years?
I do a lot. Nobody tells you when you start a business that you will be inundated with admin shit. Like, hey, you are registered to do business in DC, and every year you have to file this report and you have to sign this document and file this franchise tax. And great, if your business grows, you now have to do that in California and Washington State, and just but that's so behind the scenes that you don't really see that, right? When you read about founders or entrepreneurs, it's like they're talking about their business or they're launching a new product, but there's a lot of the admin ugh that you just have to deal with.
Yep.
So less of that and much more new business exploration, product development, partnerships with other brands, I, growth and change and innovation, but not for change's sake, like for good, right? It has to make sense. But I guess maybe I have shiny object syndrome, and that's kind of what I'm drawn to.
How do you compete with these big publicly traded companies? Like, is it all a Google ad spend? How do you compete? I mean, because there's a lot of mom and pop self-storage
Yeah,
out there as well.
yeah. We really try not to compete. Certainly not on the marketing side. I mean, for sure, we have Google Ads to supplement some of our other marketing efforts, but I, I like to think, and we do a really good job of targeting the local audience or the 1 to 3 mile radius around a location. And you know what? Because we're closer, we're going to show up on that Google Maps search, and we're more likely to show up on the ad search because if you're running a
You're right there.
geo targeted campaign, yeah. And hey, if we can work with the landlord and get a sign outside the building, that's advertising. Like someone's going to walk by every single day and be like, "Oh, yeah, of course. Like if I need storage, I'm going to go here." Moving companies, we partner with them. We're on all of the we do all of the SEO work that we need to do, digital directories, affiliate backlinks, so that we can really build our organic demand. We do so much. It's endless. Like we'll do activations, open houses. Hey, we're introducing ourselves to the community. Why don't you come check it out? I think our marketing person did like a bagel breakfast open house in Park Slope a couple weeks ago. And obviously bagels and New Yorkers, like it made a lot of sense. It worked. Yeah, so we tend to get creative and we try not to really lead with Google ads, but it definitely helps supplement. I think that's where a lot of startups go wrong is really depending on Google ad spend because you're just paying for your sales, right?
Yep.
And it's really hard to compete with a public storage and extra space where they have $1 million marketing budgets, and we just have a fraction of that. So, yeah, we try not to spend too much time or money there.
When you were writing out the business plan in the book and thinking about how to use underutilized real estate, what was the most surprising thing that you got wrong in coming up with this plan?
I mean, there's so many things. It's hard to pick. I I would say and hiring the wrong person. Hiring sometimes it's the right person just at the wrong time. I did that a couple times. Great person, but
Wrong
better
time for you
for
or for them?
the company for me. And oftentimes you would be blinded by the pretty logos on their resume and the like, oh, they worked at this big, amazing company. Certainly they can help me. But those aren't necessarily the people that know how to build from scratch. And I think it's really a very different calling. You have to be resourceful. You have to take ownership. You have to be very creative. and quite well-rounded in what you do, just because nothing exists. There's no tools, there's no framework. And so that's really where I got it wrong. And those are big mistakes, right? Because those are huge investments. You spend a lot of time, energy, money, and time you can't get back. And so I have a much more thoughtful recruiting process now.
What does that look like?
And yeah, we do an initial screen, we do a timed case study, a case study debrief, a cultural interview, a behavioral interview. I will typically back channel my network and get a reference or two.
Mhm.
And then I'll still get the three references that they're going to give me from a manager, a peer, and someone who's reported into them, if that applies. The back channeled references are so valuable. And
So
oftentimes,
valuable.
like if I have a really, if there's like a very close connection, before I even interview anybody, I'll just be like, hey, what was your experience like working with this person? Thumbs up or down? I don't even need to get on a call. I'm just like, give me this. And then
I
I can
like
spend
that.
more time later on. And
What
I
is the
didn't do,
case study?
it depends on the role, but we just hired a marketing person and the case study was, hey, create a marketing campaign for us to achieve this customer acquisition cost, this number of sales, this ARR growth. And it's really interesting what you get back. You get
Wow. So it's
a
like a
brand.
real project. It's not reading a case study and
Yeah.
let me know what you think about it.
Yeah. But I think it's really kind because when you think about, so it's a 2-hour case study. And when you talk to these candidates, they're like, thank you for making it only 2 hours. Because a lot of companies will send me something and be like, oh, just do it over the weekend. And your entire weekend is just that case study.
It's
And
very
it's,
smart.
yeah, and you know what? I want to see what you can do under pressure in 2 hours. Like what, what can you come up with? You have to be
So
pretty
you're
smart.
saying spend only 2 hours? Do you think
Yeah.
most people just spend only 2 hours, or do you think
Well, they,
people
they only
spend more?
spend 2 hours because they have to send it back to us within 2 hours.
Oh, wow.
I think
That's
it's
cool.
kind. And that's after they do the case study, that's what they say to me. But probably in the moment, they're just like, oh my God. Da, 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 da." Yeah.
Wow. So do you I wanna, like this is very interesting because I agree, hiring is very, very challenging because it's could have the potential to implode your company or grow your company with who you bring in, and so you, like, warn them? You're like, "Hey, you need to have 2 hours. We're gonna send you a case study. We'll
Yeah.
call you when we send it, and you got 2 hours to do it." So they know it's coming, they're ready, they're in the right headspace, and boom, you hit send and it goes. It's like a
Yes.
test.
And it's a test of commitment. How serious are you about this job? Because it's really easy to jump on a call or a Zoom and just like kind of like say the right thing. But you need to put pen to paper and show us one, what you're capable of, two, that you're committed and will invest in us the same way we're going to invest in you.
I
So
love
I
that.
think the case study does a lot of things. And the people who are put off by it are like, oh, can I just like do the case study later? Can I, you know, I'm just like, you're not serious. And
Wow, that
it
weeds
weeds out a
out
lot of
so many
people.
people. Okay, so if you had, I don't know, like an operations person, what kinda case study would you give them?
I always make it like this is a problem that we're dealing with right now.
Okay.
And one of the ones I think we did one where like we just weren't getting enough customer reviews. Hey,
Mhm.
create a customer review process that not only encourages reviews, but then like what do you do with those reviews? And I think there's a lot more in that case study, but I want to know how they're going to solve this current problem because they're literally going to solve this current problem. And in many cases, once I hire someone, they often will pull up their case study and be like, oh, how did I answer that? Because I'm actually now having to do it in real life.
100%. Oh, I love
Yeah.
this. I'm implementing this right now. This is
Do it.
amazing.
Yeah. I'll send you
100%.
some case study templates if you want.
Yeah. It's great because it's so hard, and we do so many rounds of interviews, we spend so much time with the people, but I really wanna know how they think on their own, and this reveals that, but it also reveals, like what you said, the commitment, the effort.
I have another hack along these lines, which is especially for more junior, maybe mid level roles.
Yeah.
We use a system called Workable, and people apply online, LinkedIn, Indeed, whatever the platform is. And then in Workable, we can invite someone to do a video interview. And we say, hey, do a 3 to 5 minute interview and just tell us about yourself. It will reveal so much because you and I both know you learn so much in the first 3 to 5 minutes of an interview. You're kind of like, it's going to work or it's not going to work.
Yep.
And then rather than spending my time, our team's time sifting, like literally on Zoom calls or in-person
Yeah.
meetings, we can at least watch the videos. And oftentimes it's kind of cringy.
It's great, but they're by themselves. So you ask them just like a brief question, tell us about yourself, your experience, and leave it very open-ended, 5 minutes. It records, boom,
Because
done.
I want to know what topics they're going to cover. Like, are
100%.
they long-winded and like can't focus? And they'll just be like, oh, I was born in South Africa and then I went to this like elementary school. I'm like, I don't care. So you kind of understand a little bit more about someone by reading through like or watching the video, understanding what they're telling you or what they're not telling you. So it's a really good way to save money or save time, I guess, and money. And it's just more efficient.
Yeah. For key positions, obviously, the most
That's
senior people in
different.
our company interview them,
That's
but
different.
but still though, sometimes I'm wondering like how someone got this far and our people are turning them down. Like when maybe we could have intercepted that earlier.
Yeah. And I think it
Our
could
top
be
people,
so critical for hospitality roles for
so
sure.
critical.
Because the JDs are very crisp and very clear what the role is. And so you can compare apples to apples with a lot of different
Yeah,
candidates if you give them the same prompt.
I love it. So I ask
Yay.
all the guests on the podcast the same closing question, and that is, what is your favorite hotel? You're going to the Catskills. You like to probably do some cool stuff. What's your favorite hotel?
Oh, my favorite hotel is in Hong Kong. It's called Upper House. And
Tell people
have you
about
heard
Upper House. I've heard of it.
Upper Upper House is it's like the top couple of floors of an office building and the service is excellent. It's such a sleek, timeless design and you have entire views of the harbor. And this is going to sound so silly, but they just have unlimited drinks. And so your the fridge in your room is just like always packed
It's
and
a
then they bring
free
you
bar.
snacks, free bar. And it's just like, yeah, this is probably cheap for you to do and makes me happy. And it's just impeccable service. And I think Upper House is owned and operated by Swire Properties, which is like a big
Yep.
Hong Kong conglomerate,
Yep.
also in Miami. And I love it. And we talk about it all the time.
So my experience with Upper House, my parents actually stayed there,
Oh,
and
wow.
I always thought Upper House was kind of like it's not like, okay, if you go to Hong Kong and you like luxury hotels, maybe you stay at like the Rosewood or the Peninsula or something like that. I would view Upper House as a luxury hotel, but definitely more cool and edgy and boutiquey. And I thought it was awesome when my parents went there and liked it and they loved it, because if you are kind of a cool boutique hotel and you could appeal to the 25-year-old, the 30-year-old, and the 65-year-old, that's an awesome thing.
Yeah. And I
It's
think it
hard to
does a
do.
good job of integrating with the city rather than being a fortress. Because I think
Yep.
there are hotels in Hong Kong that are like, these are my gated
A palace. Yeah.
walls and like, don't come in unless you're a guest. And Upper House has like a beautiful restaurant on the top of this building. And it just feels more authentic is maybe not the word, but just like feels more comfortable. Yeah.
Love it. Thanks for coming on the podcast. Appreciate it.
Thank you for having me, Jake.
This is fun. Hey, everyone. It's Jake here. Thanks again for joining me on this conversation. Be sure to subscribe on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or YouTube. Lastly, don't forget to follow me on Twitter at @JWurzak. I'll see you in the next episode.
Jake Wurzak is the founder and CEO of Dove Hill Capital Management. All opinions expressed by Jake and his guests are solely their own and do not reflect the opinions of Dove Hill Capital Management. This podcast is for informational purposes only and does not reflect or represent real estate, financial, or investment advice.